My super hot take is most experiments should fail.
Right.
Like, I think you wanna run a lot of them, and I think you wanna kill them quickly.
Yeah.
And what that means is, we've been saying for years it's an Aaron-Dignanism, it still slaps, like, radical change at a non-radical scale, but this is how you get that. It's like, do really weird shit, but do it really tight and not for a very long time. If 90% of your experiments are successful, they're not really experiments. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to At Work with Reddy. I'm Rodney Evans, and the man on the mic is Sam Spurlin.
Hello.
Hello. AI continues to rewrite the rules of work in this moment. Why I would construct a sentence that is that hard to say is anybody's guess. We feel like the future of work is here, though. And now the question isn't whether or not you have a choice about adaptation, but how you're going to design work from this moment forward for what's coming.
Said another way, work design is no longer optional, and the teams that treat it like a side project are actively being left behind. And the ones that treat it as essential will keep up with the pace of change.
So today we're going to dig into experimentation. I saw a post the other day from Sam Altman, and he was talking about like the kind of company you want to build. And honestly, not to be a fucking know-it-all, but like it's the same shit we've been saying for 15 years and having clients be like, "Are you sure?"
Mhm.
And now, we're gonna really do it, right, guys? We're gonna really do it because we have no choice. So today we're gonna talk about experimentation, which is one of the foundational ideas that is so poorly executed in most systems. But first, we're going to check in.
We are going to check in and we're going to keep it thematic. Rodney, what is a personal experiment you've done recently or are thinking about doing?
The one that springs immediately to mind, everybody out there who liked Adam Grant's post debunking astrology can just close your ears, just earmuffs for the next little minute. Also, like at me because I definitely want to argue with people about this. Not because I think astrology is science, but because I think it can be useful, and I think it's annoying when people are just butt heads about it. But
Fair.
I digress. I have been in a months long conversation with ChatGPT that has the backdrop of my astrological chart, but actually I just like feed it content more like a journal day to day and talk about sort of the weather of my life in an ongoing way. And I have found it so useful, I can hardly overestimate the ways in which it has helped me like process things, understand things. Um, not react to things that I normally would. It's just been a great experiment for a few months, and I'm finding it much stickier than journaling and much more useful than a lot of other things I've tried.
Cool. Love
What
it.
about you?
I bought an analog alarm clock.
Mm. Why?
That's because previously, I used my HomePod, and which is a fine alarm clock, except it has this very deep flaw, which is you can use your voice to turn it off.
Oh,
And to
no.
use your voice, you can remain horizontal in your bed. And it was becoming a little bit too easy for that to happen. So now I have to walk across the room and turn off an alarm clock. And my little trick on this is that my normal alarm goes off at the normal time, and the physical analog alarm clock goes off 1 minute later. So if I don't want to hear it because it's horrible, I have to get up and preemptively turn it off. And if I don't do that, then I will hear it. It'll make my wife mad. And that's the kind of incentive I need to get up in the morning.
You're like a teenager. I don't remember the last time I woke up to an alarm. I just wake up. That's so
That's
fortunate.
cool.
I can't even
That's cool for
imagine
you.
what that would be like. It would be so nice to still be asleep. Okay, so let us get into this pattern. Here's how I see it out in the world. Companies say they want experimentation, not all of them, but some of them. A lot of leaders, I think, understand that experimentation is the key to innovation. I think that's pretty undeniable. But what they don't have is the foundational sort of learning mindset culturally to do it. So even in companies that say they're going to like fail fast or move fast and break things, we still often see an underlying fear and performative culture that prevents true experimentation from taking place. And the sort of bastardized version of experimentation is something that's either overly planned and sort of no fail, which isn't really an
Right.
experiment, or something that's really chaotic where people have just like gone rogue and in a fairly unstructured way are trying shit.
Yep. Yep.
In either case, when those experiments fail, and they generally will, leaders often take that as proof that experimentation wasn't the move to begin with, and the pattern sort
Right.
of repeats itself.
Right.
So we're not today going to, as we have before, try to convince anyone that experimentation is the key to change. We're just going to assume that everybody listening to that podcast is already Gucci with that, and instead, we're going to talk about what is required for experimentation to function.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay,
Let's get
great.
into it.
Yeah, you start.
Let's. I was going to start with like a brief, like, why is experimentation so central to the this? But
No.
you've made the case that we already everybody knows that.
No, it's okay, you
So
can. You still can. Maybe there's a
I
new
guess
I mean, we do have a lot
the
of new listeners. Maybe there's somebody
that's
who's
true,
like,
and I think
"Experimentation, what?"
yeah, and we can do it really, really tight. I think, and this because I guess the point that I want to make is we're not I feel like sometimes when we talk about experimentation or people are assuming that somehow we're just like these fancy weirdos who like
Mm.
want to be different and like we're not going to use the established change management theory of the last 100 years like we just need
Right.
to be special and different and I mean maybe but no it's
I'm like, I
really
mean, yes,
about
and. Uh-huh.
it's about this idea of complexity and whether or not you believe an organization is a complex adaptive system. If you do, then you have to the experimentation follows that because a complex system is inherently unknowable
Mhm.
as a complicated system, meaning that
Right.
you can't just plan the perfect approach and then execute it and know what is going to happen. So if you agree that you're dealing with a complex system, the only way to have productive interactions with it is through an iterative experimental approach. So we're coming at this from a very pragmatic point of view, not like as a bunch of fancy duchesses and dukes.
Yeah. I mean, I also wanna be that. But
Yeah.
it's interesting that you say this, and I'm glad you started here, even though I said we weren't going to, because I worked for a while with a large pharmaceutical company in my time at the Ready, and I worked with, like, a therapeutic area, and they were doing drug development, and it's the closest that I've ever been to that kind of R&D,
Mhm.
and it's so interesting that in that kind of field, like, it is so obvious that when you're trying to create a new drug, the human body is a complex system, and you're gonna have to do a lot of stuff to figure out how the drug is going to impact the
Yep.
human body. Like,
Yeah.
it's just it's so obvious, like, it's so obviously, like, in the posture, in the mindset, in the
Yeah.
DNA of people who are doing something like drug development
Right.
to have that understanding, to have the understanding that experimentation with ever increasing fidelity and ever increasing risk is how you get a new drug to market.
Right.
And yet, in a company which presumably is exponentially more complex than a single human body, we're like, what if our thing, we could just perfectly plan what all of the consequences and second and third order effects would be,
Yeah.
and then preemptively mitigate those and then just roll it out. And I'm like,
Right.
how does anybody not see the parallel between these things and go like, you would never do that with a drug. You would never
Yeah.
make a 2-year roadmap of how a drug is going to get into the population and then just go step by step without doing an experiment. I mean, you could, but you'd
Totally.
be like, you'd kill a lot of people and you get like real sued bad.
Yeah.
So it's just so interesting to me how, even though science has this very well hewn position on how you create something that is safe and useful, so many companies just refuse to engage in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. really interesting to think about it. I think the inscrutability of the human body and similar sort of biological systems, I think allows us to have that mentality more easily. Whereas in an organization, because they are collections of humans and we have created a lot of human sized ways to interact with it, we think that we can control it a lot more than we actually can. And not to make this an AI episode, but I think this will actually be an interesting thing to follow with AI as it is
Mm,
experimented with more and more in organizations. Where does it break up our kind of human sized conception of
right.
organizations in a way that actually makes organizations more inscrutable and therefore more amenable to a true kind of iterative experimental approach?
Right. I think that's so true. Okay, so now
Cool.
that you
All
did
right,
the
we
experimentation
did
101,
complexity
this is why you
101.
have to do
Yes.
it. Yeah, it's not a watch, it's the weather. Carry on.
Yeah. Karen, no, we're done. We're good. So,
Okay, we're done.
okay. Yeah, we're done with that part. Now we're going to talk about why and how it seems to be so difficult within organizations. And it seems like we talked in the pattern. You kind of talked about both ends of a continuum that aren't
Yeah.
great. So why don't you
Yeah.
grab the side that is more interesting, either the like chaos or the other end, and we'll start there.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna talk about actually what I find to be missing from both.
Cool.
So, from both the overly bureaucratic and the overly chaotic side, which is the third way here is just enough scaffolding for experimentation. So, on the bureaucratic side, what you have is people who, before the experiment ever even kicks off, they want to know what the key results are going to be, how they're going to track it, when it's going to succeed, what is going to happen, and on what timeline. And the most
What are you going
important
to do
thing
next?
is steps in a plan,
Yeah.
ownership, and tracking. That's not what I'm talking about when I say scaffolding. Usually, what really good experimentation is missing, if I had to say two things, it's authority and resourcing. That's
Okay.
usually where I see experimentation fall down. So, somebody has an idea for something that they could test. It becomes something that is either like side of desk or unfunded or unclarified. And or what happens, I think, with a lot of good ideas is it's unclear whether the individual with the hypothesis has the authority to actually run the experiment. So they're
Sure.
like, I think that we should change our budgeting process.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, the system fights back. The system is always going to fight back. So, unless you are the finance person in charge of the budgeting process, like
Yeah.
you're immediately going to run into a wall with that one. And so,
Yeah.
I'm saying this because I think that when we want to run a really great experiment, we have to have a really clear space and a really clear lab to do it. And I'm going to give an example from the Ready because you can pile on to this one. And it's a place that
Okay.
I think we have done really disciplined experimentation and it's with performance marketing. So we have a member who has a lot of experience in marketing. For a variety of reasons, we realized that y- it's you guys, you listeners, you're it. We realized that like basically we are talking to ourselves, like we're in a bit of an echo chamber, and people who listen to us and consume our content have been around for 10 years. And also we're just talking to you guys. We want to talk to more people, not because we don't love you, but because there are a lot more people out there in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and so we were like, how do we essentially like broaden our market?
Yep.
And the experimentation around this has been hyper disciplined. So it started with a clear proposal, a clear timeline, a clear investment, clear role charters from the people involved, clear like in 3 months we would expect to see this and we're going to start tracking the data at this time to see the delta between what we believe and what's actually happening. And real clarity with me of like, Rodney, as the steward of this company, like we need you to do these things and then also to like willfully ignore these other things because you're just going to put sand in the gears and be annoying. and
Yeah.
and it has worked because we gave it enough oxygen and enough time and enough space and enough clarity to know what we were testing, to run real tests, and to see real results and to use those to steer.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to talk about the outcome because, first of all, that's still TBD. And second of
Yeah,
all,
it's
it doesn't
ongoing.
really matter.
Yeah.
The idea here, though, is like a fair amount of work went into clarifying the petri dish. And one person with the support of a team saying, this is what would be needed to run these tests well enough
Right.
to get to learn.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of people, frankly, shutting up and letting that happen.
Yeah.
That almost never happens in companies that I see.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
that
it doesn't
that
happen for 6 months. It happens for like 6 days. And then somebody's like, so where are we with that? Can we get a status? Should we get a status meeting on the calendar?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the way you describe that, what just kind of clarified for me is what it's so one could listen to what you just said to me, like, isn't that like it's like a ton of upfront work? Isn't that what we're trying to like push up against? It was a ton of upfront work to create the space in
Yeah,
which a lot of very organic and trusting and quick and autonomous work can happen. And I think a lot of times that is flipped in an
right.
organization. Like we don't really ever define where we're going to do this or what the constraints are. And instead, we are all in the mix arguing over all the ad copy. It's like, well,
That's right.
that's not actually a good use of our time. And not really, we're not really experimenting with anything there other than like how much we can test each other's patience.
I think that's exactly right. And to that point, I would say it is more work upfront than how this kind of thing, which is really any new thing, normally gets launched to create that space. You're right.
Yeah.
And once it's running, like someone who was external to the ready looked at that work probably 3 months in and was like, "You guys have done like 16 months of work in 3 months." It's, like, pretty astonishing in terms of the data gathered, the number of tests run, et cetera, et cetera, and this is why. Like, when
Right.
people say they want speed, it's because we weren't futzing with pixels and ad copy and arguing about palettes and, like, we, like, let the experts do their thing and, like, let
Yeah.
it run, and this is where the stuff stumbles in
Yeah.
organizations. And so
Yeah.
we hear we want speed, we hear we want experimentation, but then also we want like a lot of control and a lot of information and a lot of say in a lot of things that don't matter. And you can't actually have all of that at once.
Totally. This is why I find myself frequently talking about experimentation as a posture within an
Mm.
organization,
Mhm.
which when I say that word, it's basically pointing to the idea that it's not just the moves you described there, but it's how all of us interact with that around it. So the idea that we're not expecting the folks who are doing this experiment to show up a week later with everything figured out, the understanding that we don't have to understand everything that's happening within this experiment, and that we trust that there are checkpoints built in, and when we need to weigh in on something we will weigh in on it, and this won't be a runaway process that just runs forever. I think
Right.
you need everybody around experiments to also have that posture. Otherwise, you've got this mismatch where the people who are actively running the experiments are like, yeah, you want me to be doing this experiment, but really you just want me to tell you the answer. And that
That's right.
is a recipe for not really learning anything.
Well, and further to that, really what you want is me to tell you it worked.
Right. Yeah. The answer, and we found it because it worked.
Yeah.
Not the answer because
Like,
like it didn't work and we're pointing to something else.
and this is one of the fundamental problems with experimentation in a lot of companies is that my super hot take is most experiments should fail.
Right.
Like, I think you want to run a lot of them and I think you want to kill them quickly.
Yeah.
And what that means is, we've been saying for years it's an Aaron Dignanism, it still slaps, like, radical change at a non-radical scale, but this is how you get that. It's like, do really weird shit, but do it really tight and not for a
Yeah.
very long time. If 90% of your experiments are successful, they're not really experiments.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. And as I was preparing for this episode, I thought about something in a different way that I want to run by you and see
Fun.
if it tracks to your experience as well. Because I do think I agree with you. But the thing that I landed on when I was thinking deeper about this is that I see too many experiments that are kind of in the messy middle size wise. And I think
Mm,
it's much more interesting to do very small micro experiments that are light and easy to spin up and learn from and have very small blast radiuses, or doing something that is requires greater coordination, greater cohesion, maybe a little bit of planning up front, like the performance marketing one that you talked about, that is
yeah,
involving lots of roles and lots of teams.
right.
And though I see those as kind of different ends of a continuum, and both are cool and interesting. And it's the stuff in the middle that I think sometimes ends up being the most challenging and the most difficult to actually execute and learn from.
Mm. What's an example of something in the middle?
I think something in the middle is like a couple of teams kind of half-assing something together about their
Mm,
workflow or about how they're working together, where we it requires kind of more thought up front about how does this actually work and interface with other parts of the organization, and we're kind of just trusting that we'll just try something and we'll learn from it as we go, which I think sometimes works. I think it's the I think what it comes down to is people don't have enough skin in the game. I think the middle
mm,
one is when there's not enough skin in the game, and we're just like kind of half-assing a thing.
mhm.
Whereas this really small stuff, you don't need to have a ton of skin in the game. Like you can buy an alarm clock and see if it helps you wake up easier. And
Sure.
the stuff that requires much more skin in the game, we've created the structure for. It's that middle amount of commitment that is the problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. The messy middle of experiments is like, we see something missing and we're going to make it. And I think a more interesting reframe on that is, can you go and validate what the problem is with the missing
Right.
thing as the experiment?
Is it
Because
actually missing?
is it actually missing?
Yeah.
I think too many experiments at the team level result in documentation that nobody gives a shit about.
Right. If we gave a
And
shit about it,
it's
in most cases, it would already exist.
yeah, because if it was a real problem, like it would have been documented. And also
Yeah.
usually, I mean, documentation doesn't solve that many problems in a complex
Right.
system, if we're
We
being
we like to
honest.
think it does because
Yeah, we
it's
like to think it does, but
simple.
like, yeah, what does it really do? So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting. I do think the altitude of experimentation is a tricky one. It's
Yeah.
a tricky nut to crack. And I think that there are also like some interesting things I've heard recently. Like I just saw someone I was at the charter conference last week. Shout out to my buddies at Charterworks. And someone on stage, I can't remember. I'm not going to say because I'm going to get it wrong. And then somebody's going to be
Sure.
like, that's not who it was. But somebody on the stage was saying that in her company, which I believe was an AI native company, but in her company, there's basically a marketplace of agents, and any employee can create an agent and they effectively get deployed and upvoted very like organically within the system. Now, that to me is like a very contained way of doing experimentation because basically
Yeah.
I can build an agent to address my problem that I think is worth addressing. And then if you also think it's useful, you can use it. And if you don't, it doesn't matter because I still have the thing that's doing what I want.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really require team coordination. There's a social component of it so that you're seeing which things are solving organizational problems, blah, blah, blah. That's a great use
Yeah.
case for experimentation. And what I loved about it is actually the open source nature of like, and then anybody can redeploy these and we can see like what really slaps.
Totally.
That feels like a really clear, like small things that add up to big things.
Yeah.
But the gnarlier things like, we want to change the algorithm with our board. It's like you probably want to like do that really well one time and see what happens rather
Yeah.
than trying to architect something for a year.
Totally. Totally. And that gets me thinking about the opportunity of scaled experimentation. And by that I don't mean huge experiments. I mean lots of experiments
Yeah.
in huge organizations. And I think you just described an example of how experimentation needs to be paired with transparency.
Mhm.
Marketplaces are tools, are mechanisms for transparency.
Yep.
And I think the huge opportunity in a lot of organizations that I haven't necessarily seen done super well lots of times is how does the learning from local experiments scale up into other parts of the organization? How
Dude, this is
frequently
so hard.
are we learning from what others have done in their experiments for our own inspiration or for our own tweaks? That is, I think, a huge opportunity that is really hard to do.
It's so hard to do. I mean, there's no there's no one and done answer here. Certainly, I think having like trained GPTs is a really helpful way of doing this because people can pull the information that they actually want rather than trying to consume an entire Slack feed of demos or wins or whatever. But all of that being said, it's still really hard. Like I think that the sort of like the knowledge I hate to say knowledge management, but like the knowledge availability part of experimentation in a complex system is something that I see so few organizations really able to crack. I think it's incredibly difficult because it's not just is the information available and pullable. It's like do people know
Relevant.
that? Do they know what's there? Do they
Yeah,
know when to ask? Do they know how to apply it? Do they have time in their day? Is it something it's just like it's a whole ball of string that again really relates to having learning being part of your culture, which is
yeah.
pretty rare.
Totally. Well, and plus the added complexity of just because one team or one part of the organization experimented with this thing and it didn't work, the overly simplistic takeaway is like, okay, won't try that
We
anywhere
don't have to
else.
do that anymore.
But like that is absolutely not the takeaway. If it's like a different
Right.
department or a different function that has a completely different purpose than yours, maybe yeah, it wasn't a good fit for their context, but it might be for yours. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's such an interesting thing, and I wonder how and if it can really be cracked in large organizations because I think this is one of the benefits of being a huge organization if you were able to do this really well because you are just
Mm.
inherently able to test more things more
Yeah.
rapidly, and
Yeah.
if that is connected to learning more and learning quickly, then you are at such an advantage. But I think it's in most legacy organizations which are almost by definition older. They were not built on this
Right.
DNA and have not built it for themselves yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, like a lot of other things that we've talked about and sort of myth busted on this show, I feel like this is also one of those things that's really easy to sort of like mock.
Mm,
Like I definitely have had the interaction with a trad leader who's very like MBA-ish, who I think finds experimentation unserious. And and to your point about being like fancy weirdos, I've definitely had the interaction where I think someone was like in an attempt to defend their position, trying to undermine this idea by discrediting my understanding
yeah.
of how work is and like
Yeah.
how real business goes. And like, first of all, who fucking cares? Second of all, like
Undermining
it's just
scientific
lazy.
method. How
I know.
dare you, sir?
Well, this is
Scientific,
the
the,
thing.
the foundation of our modern world.
Dude, honestly, it's like this is how we discovered literally everything that was interesting that ever happened. But to your point about what organizations are built on, you know, management science, which is what the Harvard Business School was founded on, the first principle is there is a right answer. The first principles are through analysis and research, you can be correct. And so we really are, when we have these conversations with leaders who have been socialized and educated in traditional and especially in elite institutions, we are fighting against 130 years of history at this point and trying to unlearn the idea that a right answer is uncoverable with enough analysis and debate
Yeah.
and into the mindset that we're not sure what the right answer is and all we can do is tests.
Totally. And I think maybe a way that I have sometimes taken a couple of steps in their direction and maybe break down some walls is that sometimes I think that understanding they are there is a misunderstanding that what we are saying is just try random shit. We're
Right.
not talking about random mutation here. We are talking about practices and ways of working and processes that we have seen work in other contexts. And there's good foundational, like people have thought about them, they have used them in other contexts. And we're saying, try this thing that has worked in other places in your context, not
That's right.
try this super random thing that makes no goddamn sense and maybe it'll work here. Like that's
Right.
we're
You never know.
experimenting with whether an idea that whether an idea works in this context, not the the idea itself in most cases. Not saying that you can't come up with something totally random and new, but that's generally not what the vast majority of experiments are.
Yeah, I think that's right. What have we not hit?
Um, I think one thing that I wanted to say, and Jack may cut this if it doesn't really go along with the flow of the conversation, but I think it is useful to also think about the system's reaction to an experiment as
Mm.
data about the experiment.
Ooh,
That is useful data. So
say
if you
more.
are I think, let's take something really simple. We change the operating rhythm, and people are asked to show up in a different way, and the people who are not actually involved in the meetings, and there is some aspect of them being like, yeah, I could picture both ends of this, really positive or really negative. Like, who are you to tell us to meet in a different way or that our meetings are bad or the positive version of that is like what's happening over there? Like what like I'm
Right.
noticing that people who are involved in this thing are like happier and having a better time. I think sometimes we limit our view of what is happening in what an experiment has accomplished to the people who were in the experiment itself. So we're just asking the people
Mm,
in the algorithm, like, hey, do you like your algorithm better? Instead of like seeing
right.
like what else it changes around in the system. I mean, I think you could even think about it in more of an org designy way. Like, all right, we changed the algorithm with an experiment over here. And suddenly there's like these conversations about strategy that have never really happened before over in this other
Yep.
place. Like, what is that
Yep.
telling us? That's interesting. And maybe we follow our nose that way so that our next experiment has nothing to do with algorithm. It pointed us toward this other thing that we wanted to dig into as well.
Yeah,
Does that make
that makes a
sense?
lot of sense. Yeah,
Okay.
it does make sense.
Okay.
I mean, I think the other thing that is worth saying about the systemic tendency of experimentation is they tend to accumulate inertia. I feel like this what m my experience as a steward of a company with experimentation, and we've run a lot of them in the last couple of years, in a much more disciplined way than we used to. We used to be really fucking YOLO about experiments, and we often didn't get much from them
Right.
because they were poorly scaffolded and underinvested and side of desk, and it was like, I don't know, is this person gonna, like, figure out a new line of
Yeah.
business while they're fully deployed to a client just on, like, Sunday mornings?
Yeah. The YOLO nature of it was like there's a very, very small chance that it was going to work amazingly well and be obvious to everybody. And we pat ourselves on the back. And then
Totally.
the vast majority would like continue forever or fizzle out or nothing would really happen. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I can count on, like, less than one hand the number of experiments from a bunch of years that I would say really, like, turned into something material over time. I say this because that was also a lot easier, actually. The
sure.
more chaotic approach to experimentation, where like we're not super crisp on the hypothesis we're testing, on when we expect to see results, on what we would like those results to be in the delta, on when we're going to convey those and how we're going to measure and when we're going to steer and when we're going to shut it down and when we don't do that work, it's a lot easier just to be like, oh, like, there was an idea on the board that somebody like opens an ice cream store Did Joe ever get around to doing that? No. Oh, well, like we didn't spend any. It was kind of like nothing ventured, nothing gained, but
Yeah.
the opposite of that, which was like, well, we didn't
Yeah.
get anything, but it didn't cost us anything. Who cares? Let's do it
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
In a
Which
lot of ways,
actually
that
has a
was
huge
easier.
which has a huge impact because what was invested was time and even just like mental capacity, which is
Totally.
like super rare in an organization. Like unaccounted
Totally.
for time and attention is maybe the rarest resource in an organization.
Totally. But emotionally, it was easier because it was like
Yes.
low
Yes. Yeah.
risk
No
and
skin in the game. Yeah.
no skin in the again, back to the no skin in the game,
Yeah.
right? Like it and so now over the last couple of years of like taking bigger swings and doing bigger things, I will say as someone who has seeded a lot of those things or at the very least helped to protect the space for them, it is not like, it's not easy. Like, it's not easy because, first of all, sunk cost fallacy is real around experimentation.
Yeah.
My experience so far is there are very few things that are, like, clearly ready to be killed. Like,
Right.
especially for an optimist, there's almost always some kernel of something interesting learned or uncovered in an experiment that you're like, "Should we just rescope this and keep going in this like
Yeah.
direction that's 45 degrees off?" It's very uncommon in my experience for it to be like 0 out of 10 points awarded, shut it down right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
That never happens. And so prepare for the messiness that like it's not going to feel black or white and you're going to have to make a call.
Totally.
1. 2, the opposite of that is also true. Where when you feel like you're seeing signals and like you want to double down, that also takes courage because also in early experimentation, it's really rare to see undeniable proof that it's working.
Right. At that point, it almost stops becoming an experiment. It's just like, oh, okay, like we do this now.
Right. It's like, "Oh, we hit oil." Like,
Yeah.
so, now we're just like on the geyser. Like it does not go, I mean, I'm sure it goes like that 1 in 100, but like
Yeah.
my experience is that it's rare that it goes that way. And so I'm saying this because I feel like when you're a person like I am who holds some authority and some discernment over these things, I just want to say out loud that like the messiness of it is real. The sunk cost bias is real. The searching for signal is real. Like, it's hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard actually to do this well, and that doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do, but, I don't wanna undersell that, you know, counter to what I said before, like, you're not in a lab doing very specific trials with a team of scientists who are getting very
Right.
concrete data when you're experimenting on a complex system.
Totally.
And it does take a level of judgment and taste and opinion when you're deciding the fate of an experiment that
Yep.
feels pretty uncomfortable. Like it feels uncomfortable for me. And I think I
Yeah.
have more tolerance for this stuff than most people.
How do you think, to the extent that you think you have gotten better at this over time, like what has allowed you to get better at it?
I think a couple of things. One is not doing too many things at once.
Yeah.
So, when you're using all the dry powder across a lot of bets in hopes that one of them pops, first of all, then you're trying to do the kind of discernment game in too many places. And not just like as an individual, but probably as some sort of like stewarding team. I'd rather actually, like, limit experimentation in progress, have sort of a fixed number of them running at any one time,
Yeah.
and finish one before we start the next one.
Right. Because you can use
That
that
has
as a
helped me.
forcing mechanism to decide,
Yes,
like, we could keep this one going, but I see my backlog. And do I want to keep this one going even over trying this other thing? And it
that's right.
forces you to get a little bit clearer other than just like, yeah, why not keep it going? Like maybe it'll work.
That's right. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's so easy to just be like, "Well, what if we do the other one alongside?" But, like,
Yeah.
there's only so much context switching and money and energy in any system, and so, to your point, I think the limitation of the number that we're gonna do and also being like, "If we wanna do that one of these has to stop,"
Yeah.
is actually really helpful. Um, I think the other thing is, like, we have an even over this I call them semesters. I don't know how you say a half year. It's like a
Yeah.
semester,
Sure.
biannual? I don't know.
Biannual? Yeah.
T Twice yearly, half
H1,
yearly?
H2?
It's
I don't
H1.
know.
Our
Yeah.
H2 we have an H2 even over for the ready, which is now I can't remember what the exact words are, but it's basically patients with experiments in flight even over new
Yeah.
experiments.
Yeah.
And the fact that as a team, we chose that even over, knowing what experiments were in flight, has also helped me in the moments where I get a little fiddly to be like, "No, no, 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 no fiddling. We are going to be patient with what is in
Yeah.
flight until we reach an undetermined conclusion rather
Yeah.
than launching a bunch of new shit
Yeah.
because we're feeling away." I
Totally.
think those are
Well,
the
what
things. Doing it
yeah,
as a
I was gonna
team
say
sport, limiting whip.
yeah, I love that. I love that. I was just gonna say, to point to our even over episode, what makes that a good even over is I could picture a scenario where we would want the opposite, where
Yes.
we actually want to spin up a bunch of stuff and like try a bunch of new
Yeah,
things and not double down on things we've already been doing.
totally. Totally.
Nice.
I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
Um, okay, Sam, I feel like we've covered the territory of experimentation, mostly what doesn't work. Let's give people some ideas. Why don't you
All
start
right.
us off?
I will happily do that. Uh, so my first thought is broadly around how do you cultivate more space in an organization? I think that is often what gets in the way of orgs feeling like they can do some more experimentation on kind of the internal ways of working because we've used this idea of the learning mindset over and over, and it's really, really, really hard to be in a learning mindset if your environment is expecting you to be in a performance mindset or in a performance context.
Yeah.
So, to the extent that space can be made, things can be stopped to create a little bit more space to talk about and run and design experiments, I'm a huge advocate of that, which is often why the first batch of experiments a team or an organization or a department might do is around how do we create more space?
Yeah. I
What do we
love that.
stop? What do we do differently? How do we reserve a chunk of every 2 weeks for us to deliberately shift into a more of a learning mindset?
Um,
What do
this
you got?
so this is way more tactical, but
Yeah.
one of the habits that has really taken hold over the decade at the Ready is using an experiment template.
Hell yeah.
And we've used this with a bajillion clients over the years. It it kind of works every time. Like it's kind of awesome in every single context. And the
It's always
reason that
better than not using it. It doesn't always solve every problem, but it's always better than not using it.
dude, 100%. And like I'll regularly get something shipped to me that has like a bunch of other stuff up top and I'm like blah blah blah, where's the template? Because
Yeah.
the template is where I'm going to determine whether the thinking around this
Yeah.
passes muster.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mustard? Muster. Mustard?
Mustard. Mustard?
Muster.
Mustard.
I don't know.
Mustard?
Okay. It's one of those things. Um, so here's what's on the template. This is gonna take a second, but strap in and get a pen because you should make this template and start using it. Define the opportunity or the tension. So, what are we solving for? What do you need? Be specific. You only want one tension per experiment proposal. So, don't be like, here's 50 things that are wrong. Like, what's the actual thing that you're solving for? Relevant background, give a little context about the situation. Proposal. What are you actually proposing to address the tension? We love this. Then, other options considered but not recommended. Here's what is so rad about this field is that everyone who has ever sat in a meeting of any kind, who's heard a proposal of any kind, the immediate response is, "Did you think about X?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's your opportunity to be like, yeah, nerds, I did think about X and I wrote it down here so you don't have to ask. Now,
Yeah.
on the off chance that you have an idea in that meeting that is not captured here, fantastic. But my experience is 9 times out of 10, they
Yeah.
in fact did think about X before I had a chance to be annoying about it.
Yeah.
Then, so that's the material, that's the content of the experiment that's being proposed. Below that is additional context that I find incredibly valuable. So there's facts, what do we know, data points, constraints, etc. There's assumptions, what assumptions are we making? There's constraints, what constraints must be considered, what's non-negotiable. That could be like, we only have $10,000 for this, or this has to be done by the end of the year. Risks, what are the risks if a key assumption is wrong? So calling back to the other field. Dependencies, impact to the system, other roles or people. What are some possible consequences of the proposal? And decision makers, which person, role, or group has the authority to make this decision? Okay, those are the fields of it. And there's prompting questions for each one that I didn't talk about. But what I find this gets you without actually, like, it takes way, way less time than starting from a blank sheet of paper to try to explain something, is it really makes explicit what we know and what we don't know.
Right.
And that is incredibly useful because we're basically trying to get a group of people to say, this is safe to try, even though we don't know a bunch of stuff.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that muscle in and of itself is so weak in most organizations. And usually the conversation is, how could we know more? Rather than knowing that there are these gaps and assumptions and risks and whatever, can we do it anyway? So that we
Right.
don't spend more time trying to know more, we can immediately start trying to learn more.
Yeah. Yeah. I've experienced the difference between sitting in a meeting, a decision meeting where there has been a proposal filled out ahead of time that we've all read and where there hasn't been. And boy, howdy, is it such a better
Dude,
conversation when that proposal template has been thought through and filled out and let people have been able to read it ahead of time and maybe even already drop some comments in. The quality of the
yes.
conversation is so good.
Yeah. It makes my teeth itch when I see, like, just when a client just
Yeah.
sends me a document that's like 12 pages. It's like, we want to talk about this at the offsite. And I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
how?
Yeah.
Like, how are we going to do that? So yeah,
Totally.
I love a template. Um, Now, one other pro tip about using it is, decision rights and like authority is just sort of borked in most places. So our little template assumes that you know who needs to make the decision. I get that that's like easier
Sure.
said than done in most places. And my sort of hack when I'm creating a proposal is I try to get the people involved. If authority isn't clear, I try to get the people involved who, one, will actually have to work on the experiment to make it happen, or a representative of that. Two, the person or people who will have to fund it, or like have an eye on the monies or the
Yeah.
resource allocation or whatever. And three, someone who's going to be involved in like the longer term maintenance. So
Right.
if I'm like, we should make a course about AI. It's like you should probably have like the person who's going to have to like make the landing page and create the workflow and do like
Yeah.
think about the whole thing, not just the inception of the idea in order to get consent, even if they're not all involved at the very beginning, because what you don't want to do is run an experiment that turns out to be really, really rad and then have whoever's maintaining that work, whether it's ops or technology or HR or whoever, be like, yeah, cool. We don't have any capacity to
Yeah.
do this. So
Yeah.
why did you make it?
Totally. Or you made some decisions early on that didn't seem like a big deal to you because you aren't an expert in this domain. And actually, we've kind of borked ourselves by
Yeah,
not
exactly.
making this alternative thing. Yeah,
That's
totally.
right.
I love it.
What you
Okay,
got?
I've got one more much more tactical than my first one. So this comes from the observation that every time I work with a team who is thinking about kind of ways of working, experimentation, op model experimentation, experimentation focused on the organization itself, far and away, the way things go off the rails is that everybody has experiments for other people to do. Everybody is just coming up with experiments left and right, and they're never about like what you actually have any sort of influence or control
I
over.
love
So
it. Yeah.
I've made the rule that in these workshops, you're not allowed to make an experiment for anyone else
Uh-huh.
without being in conversation with them.
Great.
So
Yeah.
what that means though is just that like start with where you are, and if you're a senior leader, you have more kind of freedom of movement and greater influence to propose experiments because you do influence more. But even as an individual contributor on a team, there are plenty of experiments that you can steward and own, even if it's purely just the individual how I show up to things or how I do my role. And
Yep.
all of that is valuable, and building the muscle of identifying the levers that you can experiment with that you actually can reasonably reach, it will serve you and your team and your organization so much better than kind of just blue sky solutioneering experiments for everybody else.
Solutioneering is a new word that I like a lot. It feels like the combination of mountaineering and making
Yeah,
solutions.
yeah,
Solutioneering, folks. You
that's
heard it
right.
here. Okay, my last idea that's not really an idea at all, but is like the warning label on experimentation is if you're doing it right and you're having the moments of reflection and you're having the cadence of check-ins and retrospection and you're really looking clear-eyed at the data to see if this thing has legs, you're going to have a lot of failure. And also, what is going to come with that is probably disappointment. And I'm saying this as a PSA because most of us, especially in professional contexts, try to avoid disappointment at all costs. Maybe
Yeah,
even more than like failure. We try to avoid disappointment. And
yeah,
so I'm just like, prepare to kind of hate this because no experiment gets launched because everybody thinks it's a stupid idea.
yeah,
Everybody launches an experiment with a twinkle in their eye. And when it doesn't work out, it's a bummer. And I don't think that you can't avoid that. And it's not the reason not to do it. And it's not
yeah,
the reason to massage it into something that is inevitably going to work. Because again, that's not an experiment. But prepare yourself and your team that's launching it for the reality that you are likely going to have to kill your darlings and you are likely at some time to be confronted with your past self who had a lot of belief and optimism around this thing and is now like, I got to take it out back and shoot it.
yeah,
It sucks. Like
yeah,
that part is really hard. And so, like, have the kind of systems, conversations, support, whatever around that allows that to happen.
yeah.
Because if you're avoiding that at all costs, you're never going to do anything interesting.
Totally. The the glib, I don't know if it's glib. Maybe the glib thing that I was gonna say is like, well, and that's why, the true measure of an experiment is not whether or not it worked, but whether we learned from it. Which yes, is true
We love to
and
say that.
also is hard. What was that?
I said, we do love to say that.
We do love to
I
say
love to
that.
say it too.
And it's one of those things where like you can say the words and agree with the sentiment. And when the thing that you conceptualized and thought was going to be great ends up not being that. And yes, we learned from it. Yeah, of course. And we'll capture those lessons and we'll share them. Like it still sucks.
Yeah.
And I think over time you can start to divorce your identity from like, does this experiment work or not? And really focus on like, what is it teaching us and what are we going to do next? But you have to be in a particularly, I think, receptive environment for that to actually be cultivated and grow over time, which is not always the case.
Yeah, that's right. All right,
Cool.
Sam. I
All
think
right.
that we've given them what we can on experimentation. Now they just have to go do stuff.
We've done our job. It's out of our hands
We
now.
did our love it.
All right. So we are always looking for new topics for the show. So if you have an organizational pattern that you're having trouble changing, or for this episode in particular, If you have an experiment that you ran or participated in your
Ooh.
organization that either went really well or really poorly, you just want to tell us about it, I would love to hear those as well. And you can send them to podcast@theready.com.
Nice. This show is engineered by Taylor Marvin and produced by our vacationing friend, Jack Van Amberg, who I kidnapped last weekend in Los Angeles. More on that later. At Work with the Ready is created by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. Thank you so much for listening.